Hello, everyone, and welcome to the 13th ever Highlight Haven interview. My name is Matthew Heiserman, and today we are joined by a very special guest. He is a host on both the VSiN College Football Tailgate Show and Betting Podcast. He is also a part of the Sports Report on 102.9 The Hog. Let me welcome Tim Murray to the show. It's great to have you on.
Matthew, appreciate you having me, man.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's get right into it. I just want to start by asking how you got so into broadcasting to begin with.
Yeah, it's a great question. All my life I knew I loved sports and knew I wanted to do something in sports. Didn't know exactly what that was going to be, and played sports my whole life. And as I got into high school, started to think about potential majors, and ultimately decided to be a broadcast major at Muhlenberg College. Played some basketball there as well. While in school, wrote for the newspaper, broadcasted our football games, did a radio show, and then did a bunch of internships. So, sports has always been something I knew I wanted to be a part of, but the question always had been what in what forum? How do I want to, what do I want to do? I did an internship at NBC in Washington, D.C. after my sophomore year of college, and really, really liked producing. Thought that might be the route that I ultimately wanted to go. And then started to do some radio internships after my junior year, did some baseball play-by-play, and kind of got the itch to be on air. So, I've been fortunate to get a number of on-air opportunities throughout my career and make it a career. But certainly, my whole life, I knew that I wanted to be in sports. I've always loved sports, and didn't know exactly what path I would eventually take. And fortunately for me, the opportunities just arose, through college and whatnot to be on air. And now here I am, 16 years after I graduated college, still fortunate enough to have an on air role at a number of spots.
Yeah, now you were able to cover ice hockey for Westwood One at the 2018 Winter Olympics. Can you kind of describe what that opportunity was like?
Yeah, that's probably one of the coolest things, maybe the coolest thing that I've done in my entire career. In 2018, I knew some folks that were involved with the Olympics on Westwood One. For those unaware, Westwood One is a national radio entity. They have the rights to the Super Bowl and March Madness, Sunday Night Football, Monday Night Football, et cetera, college football games. And had an opportunity to meet up with someone who was running the Olympic broadcast, and someone, fortunately for me, actually dropped out kind of last minute, and around October or November of 2017 was asked to go over to Pyeongchang, South Korea, to be a part of the Olympic broadcast team, for Westwood One. And my role was kind of like a utility infielder a little bit over there. Did a little bit of everything. My main role was to be the studio host for all of our hockey broadcasts. So we did, the men's USA games, the prelims, and then when they made it into the knockout stage, we did the gold medal game, which was the Olympic athletes of Russia versus Germany. And then we also did the USA Canada women's prelim game and the gold medal match, which the United States won in 2018. So that was part of my role. And then my other role was just go out and about, be a part of the field, go to a lot of different events, went to a lot of hockey games, both men and women's, did live reporting from there, went to a whole bunch of other events to do some live reporting, cross country skiing, ski jump, luge, a lot of different events. So yeah, it's an event that I'll never forget being a part of, traveling halfway across the world, being in Korea for 3 weeks, being a part of the official broadcast on the radio side. I don't know, to be honest, and I've been fortunate enough to do a lot of neat things throughout my career. I don't know if that'll ever be topped. It really was one of the most incredible and gratifying moments of my entire career.
Yeah, now when it comes to broadcasting, you've done it all. That includes reporting, podcasting, and hosting on various radio stations. Can you explain why it's so important to be diversified in the broadcasting industry?
Yeah, I think it's a great question, and I've tried to do a little bit of everything, and see what I'm most comfortable at. Especially too for younger aspiring broadcasters, to be well versed and capable of doing a lot of different things opens you up for jobs, and for from editing audio to being a field reporter to writing. Like, I'll be honest, writing is not a strength of mine, and I fully recognize that. But I've certainly done some writing, whether it be for VSiN's website or other entities throughout the years. Field reporting is certainly something that I've had a lot of fun doing. Sideline reporting I've gotten to do the last 3-4 years at some bowl games. So yeah, I think as a young aspiring broadcaster too, trying different things out. As I mentioned, after my sophomore year of college, I really didn't think I wanted to be on air. I was at NBC, and they let a lot of interns do kind of a mock sports broadcast, and I didn't like it. I didn't like the bright lights, and I thought more field producing was the route that I was going to go. And then the following summer, when I did some, production on the radio side, and started to do play-by-play on baseball, I started to kind of get a little more comfortable on air and feeling like this is the route that I want to go. And, I didn't go back onto TV until 2019. So, for about over a decade, I was solely radio, podcasting, behind the scenes stuff as well. So yeah, I mean, being able to do a lot of different things opens yourself up. And as you've probably found out yourself, being able to edit on your own, and put things out there on social media, on YouTube, etc. It gives you more comfort level, and then you're more attractive as a potential candidate as you go for jobs throughout your career.
Yeah, now, of course, throughout this interview, I did want to touch on a little bit of college football. And recently, a popular topic, not just in college football, but also college sports as a whole, has been the transfer portal. Of course, there's many positives to it, but with the positives comes a fair share of negatives. What is your opinion when it comes to the transfer portal?
Yeah, it's certainly a tricky thing, right? We've seen for years that coaches have been able to leave their jobs with no punishment but for many years, if you were trying to go from one D1 institution to another, you had to sit out a year. And I think with everything, it's not black and white. I think there is a gray area. Here in Las Vegas, we saw a situation brew up last week that got national headlines with UNLV quarterback Matthew Saluka deciding to go into the transfer portal. A lot of dispute on the NIL situation there as well. But I think all in all, I do think the transfer portal is a positive thing. There's always negatives where a young aspiring player, man or woman, goes to a school and doesn't get playing time their freshman year, and immediately they kind of want to jump ship. So yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot to be said about the transfer portal, and ability to kind of jump around as much as possible. But look, I think like I said, I think the positives outweigh the negative. You go to one institution, and you're not getting what you believed was promised to you, or you just don't see an opportunity for playing time. In college, for me, much lower level, these D1 athletes are far superior to what I was ever going to be. But I rode the bench for 2 years in college, and then was fortunate enough to kind of be a role player off the bench my junior and senior year. But there's also a circumstance, once again, making this a little more personal. I went to one high school my freshman year, had a good time, but ultimately I kind of looked around at the landscape and figured that I wasn't going to get the opportunities that I ultimately wanted, and I did transfer. So, I think everything's a case by case basis. Is it, a situation where players are jumping ship too quickly? It's possible, but I also, if you're at a lower level Division 1 institution, and you feel like you can make a big jump to a higher level D1 school that you couldn't have at a high school, yeah, I think that's a unique opportunity that you have to certainly explore. So I've got friends in the coaching ranks that would vehemently disagree with that take from me, that they don't really love the transfer portal, because the guys that they may recruit and cultivate and get them to another level from a talent perspective, they ultimately leave to go somewhere else. But that's kind of the nature of the beast nowadays. So once again, I think, to sum it up, for me, positives outweigh the negatives. And I do think for student athletes to have an opportunity to better their career is a positive thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, this is going to be the first season in college football with the 12-team playoff bracket. In your mind, was this a necessary change that needed to be made?
Yeah, I do think so. Look, I have been full on board of this expanded playoff. I thought four was certainly a breath of fresh air to go from two to four. I thought it was going to be eight initially when we talked about expansion. I think 12 is kind of the perfect number in my opinion. Now, I think ultimately it'll probably go to 14, then maybe 16. But to me, I think this is the perfect situation we've got going where you get rewarded for winning your conference. You have to be a conference champion in order to earn a bye to New Year's Eve or New Year's Day when those quarterfinal games take place. But then we also have the incorporation of campus games. And if you look back to last weekend, Alabama and Georgia, the atmosphere was unbelievable. And that's the beauty of college football and why I love it so much is as much as the NFL certainly has their great stadiums out there, whether it be Lambeau Field or whatever you want to mention in that discussion. To me, the traditions that are out there in college football are unmatched, and to see those universities, four universities, to have these games on December 20th or December 21st is going to be unbelievable. So, you look across the college landscape, Ole Miss lost to Kentucky last week, Notre Dame stunned by Northern Illinois earlier on in the year, and all these teams still have an opportunity to make the college football playoff. And like I said with the previous answer, not everything is black and white. And, certainly some people are going to think this is a watered down product. I don't think that's true. I think you're going to get a situation where more than likely you're going to get less opt-outs than what we've seen in recent years in bowl games. You've got 12 teams thinking they can win a national championship. Whether that's true or not, you get invited to the dance, you're going to have hopes and dreams of winning that championship like we see in college basketball. So I think 12 is perfect. I imagine, because money runs the world and television networks run the world, we'll get to 14 and 16. But I think this year, the way that the college football season is unfolding so far, just 5 weeks in, I think this is going to be absolutely incredible to see the third weekend of December, 4 spots across the country hosting playoff games.
Yeah, absolutely. Extremely excited for that. Now, just this past Saturday, Georgia faced Alabama in a nail-biting matchup, to say the least. Of course, with both those teams being two of the top teams in all of college football right now, what were you really able to take away from that game?
Yeah, I think a lot of things. Kalen DeBoer stepping in for Nick Saban and not skipping a beat and playing the well as they did, and coming out and really punching Georgia in the mouth was stunning. To be up 30-7, and then to see Georgia resilient and come back and take the lead 34-33 late in that game before Jalen Milroe hits Ryan Williams for an incredible score and to ultimately win that game 41-34. So, I don't think Georgia is done by any stretch of the imagination. Still have some big games left. Road trip to Texas coming up in a couple of weeks. They'll have a trip to Ole Miss. They'll take on Tennessee. So Georgia's schedule is pretty loaded. They should be a playoff team this year. I imagine they'll win a couple of those games. But, for me, the bigger takeaway, I think, was Alabama and where they are right now. I think a lot of us had questions about what this program would look like when Nick Saban retired. A couple pieces hit the portal, but Jalen Milroe right now is the favorite to win the Heisman Trophy. Will he win it? TBD. But Ryan Williams, this 17-year-old wide receiver, is emerging as a superstar. I mean, you could argue the two best receivers in the country, at least from a talent perspective, and Jeremiah Smith at Ohio State and Ryan Williams at Alabama, both freshmen. So it's pretty fun to watch that. But I think Georgia will be just fine, but I was very impressed by Alabama, the way that they came out, and then also when they got kind of slugged back from Georgia and lost the lead, they didn't skip a beat and went right down the field and scored a touchdown. So Alabama, I know a lot of people probably wanted to put them to bed and whatever metaphor you want to say about Alabama, but doesn't seem like that's going to happen anytime in the near future. Kalen DeBoer will have this program going very, very strong for years to come, it seems.
Yeah, now I was going to ask a question about Jalen Milroe potentially being the Heisman, but you kind of covered it there, of course, to be determined. Another thing that you could say is to be determined is obviously the best odds in the playoffs right now. With that being said, do you think Alabama is currently has the best odds in the playoffs?
So right now the favorite would be probably Texas by a slim margin. When you look at, from what I do from the betting standpoint, Right now, Texas is a ever so slight favorite over a team like Alabama, but Ohio State certainly in that discussion. Georgia not too far behind. It does kind of feel like those 3-4 teams will more than likely be your national champion this year. But look, Tennessee has looked really strong so far. They've had some big wins. Oregon plays Ohio State next week. Oregon's kind of been a little slow to start. I was very high on Oregon heading into this year, but a little disappointing. But it seems like they're figuring things out. But I would say, from a standpoint of who is the best team in the country, I think you have to go Ohio State, Alabama, Texas, and Georgia, and not in that particular order. I think those 4 teams at this point, I would be a bit surprised come late January if one of those 4 teams are not the national champion.
Yeah, now, of course, it hasn't been the biggest sample size yet, but has there been a team that's really surprised you up to this point with how good they've played compared to what you thought they, potentially were going to do?
Yeah, there's a bunch. I mean, you could go to a lower level, Army and Navy. These two service academies are 4-0 for the first time together since 1945. But on a bigger national standpoint, teams that are surprising, I certainly think USC is better than maybe we anticipated. With the loss of Caleb Williams and a lot of talent from a year ago. They did lose to Michigan in a kind of a tricky game there in Ann Arbor, where I thought they should have won that game. Clemson, they get blown out week 1 by Georgia, but they've looked very strong and should be playing in the ACC championship more than likely against Miami coming up in early December. And then, you can look at Iowa State, BYU, a couple teams from the Big 12 that have gotten off to undefeated starts. So, yeah, there's no doubt. There's been a lot of surprising teams this year. In my neck of the woods, UNLV off to an undefeated start, wins over Houston, wins over Fresno State, wins over Kansas. They play Syracuse on Friday. And then lastly, I'll say Indiana. Indiana is certainly not a program that many people think of when it comes to college football, rightfully so. But Kirk Cignetti, the former James Madison coach, has gone in there and has completely turned this program around. 5-0 start, dominating everybody. Maryland fans, unfortunately, saw what happened last week. So, yeah, there's been a bunch of surprise teams, no doubt, with the way that this season has started from a positive standpoint.
Yeah, now on the other hand, has there been a team that's really underwhelmed you as of late?
Yeah, I think Florida State's number one. Florida State preseason top 10 team, and they're already 1-4. Right now, going to play Clemson this weekend, staring a 1-5 start to the season. I think most people anticipated a drop off from Florida State, but definitely not this drastic of how it has all unfolded for the Seminoles. So, yeah, I think Florida State is no doubt the number one disappointing team where we are right now, and how the season has kind of unfolded. If you're getting a little nitpicky, you certainly can look at a team like Notre Dame, a team that I cheer for very closely. To lose to Northern Illinois as a 28-point favorite is really inexcusable. So I think Notre Dame is definitely disappointing, because the belief was this team could, make it to a playoff and win a couple games. Now here's the thing. They still could make the playoff. They still, coming off a big win over Louisville last week. So, Notre Dame for me, a bit disappointing, but there's no doubt in my mind the number one disappointment, from how this season started is Florida State. I mean, Florida State's a team that started in the preseason top 10, and they're not going to make a bowl game this year. So I don't think you can really make an argument for anyone else other than Florida State for being the biggest disappointment. I guess another team, too, to note would be Kansas. Kansas has lost 4 straight. This was a preseason top 20 team. Hasn't beaten an FBS opponent yet. So Kansas, losing their offensive coordinator, Penn State, and Andy Koltnicki has certainly looked like a massive loss that we weren't fully accounting for. So I would say number one, Florida State, and then number 2, Kansas. And then on a more of a nitpicking standpoint, I think Notre Dame is certainly a bit disappointing after losing to Northern Illinois in week 2.
Yeah, now, as a JMU fan, I did want to talk about them a little bit. Of course, you mentioned they lost their coach from last year, but do you see them potentially sneaking their way into the playoffs as a group of 5 school?
Yeah, they certainly are in the discussion, and I think that's another great thing about the college football playoff this year is that we know a group of 5 team will be a part of the college football playoff. I've mentioned UNLV Boise State certainly will have an opportunity to play in the college football playoff. They lost to Oregon earlier this year, but get a chance to come to UNLV on October 25th. But James Madison, when you think about the pieces that they left via the transfer portal, some going to Indiana, their quarterback going down to Texas State, but the Dukes with Bob Chesney have really been impressive. Outside of kind of a lackluster performance week 2 against an FCS opponent, they've put up 133 points the last 2 weeks. So big one certainly coming up this week, against UL Monroe. But the Sun Belt is a conference that feels like it's wide open. And if you go undefeated, which is certainly still on the table for James Madison, they're going to be in the discussion. So, it doesn't feel like you lose Kirk Cignetti, but a program that is used to winning, whether it was at the FCS ranks or now in the FBS ranks, certainly an opportunity for James Madison to be in the discussion. And I think, that's so great about the expanded playoff, which I didn't even mention from prior, which is we know a G5 school is going to make it. So whether it be UNLV, Boise State, James Madison, Liberty certainly could be undefeated, even though their strength of schedule is pretty soft. It's going to be fascinating to see how the committee plays this all out, because in recent years, they got a seat at the table. They have to go to a New Year's Six bowl game, but more often than not, the team that they were playing was probably going to have some players sitting out. Now we know they'll be going on the road. They'll be taking on a big-time opponent that'll be 100% ready to go. And it will be, once again, another good thing, I think, for the sport to see whoever emerges out of the G5 ranks to be playing for a national championship.
Yeah, of course, looking forward to seeing what happens there. Nearing the end of this interview, I do have a few more questions to ask. Throughout your career, you've gotten the opportunity to watch many exciting games, meet many awesome people. What would you say has been your favorite or most memorable moment throughout your career? And we're going to say excluding the Olympics, which we already talked about, because you were
Yeah.
saying how much you enjoyed that one.
Yeah, no, the Olympics were definitely awesome. From a career standpoint, there's been some neat ones. I'm trying to think, on a personal level, the game not necessarily was that exciting, but growing up a Notre Dame fan, over my shoulders, a panoramic view of Notre Dame Stadium. I've been to over 30 games as a fan, and last year I was able to be the sideline reporter for the national broadcast of the Sun Bowl, where Notre Dame beat Oregon State. So that was a really neat opportunity. Kind of had to work my way and convince the bosses to allow me to go, but really neat to be a part of a broadcast like that. Bringing a little more local, to be at Steven Strasburg's debut in 2010. For those unaware, Steven Strasburg, 7 innings, struck out 14, electric atmosphere there. So that was certainly an incredible game to be a part of. Maryland beat Duke, I want to say, in 2010, one of their last years in the ACC. I was covering that game for the radio station I worked at the time. So, yeah, I've been fortunate to go to a lot of events over my career and, see a lot of neat things and be a part of them. There's nothing quite like, being on a broadcast at a game. I'm fortunate enough, I'm in studio now. So, I host a show 3-4 hours a night, but, being on the sidelines or being in the booth and calling games, which I was fortunate enough to do on the minor league level for about 4 years. And then, recently this past couple of years doing bowl games. But I would say, from a personal standpoint, just the unique nature of being able to cover and interview Notre Dame players and Notre Dame's head coach Marcus Freeman on national radio is certainly something that I will never forget.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, I do have one final question to ask. And if if there was one piece of advice you could give to an aspiring sports broadcaster like me, what would it be?
Yeah, I won't be one. I'll give you a couple. I think we talked about it a little bit earlier. Do as much as possible. Can figure things out, try things out, see what you like. Especially early on in your career. Do things that you enjoy. For me, I living in Washington D.C., it's not really a hotbed for college football, but I've always kept up on it. That was always the thing that I was most passionate about. And now, fortunately, on a national level, I'm able to talk about college football quite a bit. So, do what you love, continue to work on your craft. doing what you do, doing podcasts. It doesn't matter if one person or 100,000 people are listening or watching. Reps are important. And I'm not that old. I'm 37, but when I was in high school, podcasts really weren't a thing, right? So it's hard to kind of get those reps at an early age. And I think your generation, being as technologically savvy as they are, it's really helpful. And doing things like this, and reaching out to people. And then lastly, it's building a lot of resources, building those connections, because you just never know who ultimately might come through for you, and you might be able to come through for them. I mean, I've always been a believer of what goes around comes around. And I've had some incredible people help me out throughout my career, whether it was in high school or college or early on in my career. And I've stayed in touch with a lot of those people. And they've become friends, they've become acquaintances, and sometimes they've helped me out get a job. Or you never know where a connection's ultimately going to lead you to something. And look, sometimes those connections don't lead you anywhere, but that's fine. But I think the biggest thing is to build connections and stay with those connections. And for me, I always try to keep touch with people, just seeing how they're doing. If you see something pop up, you someone gets a promotion, you just check in with them. Don't always be asking for something, but at some point there's going to come a time where you might need a recommendation, or they might have a connection for a job. So I think the biggest things for me are just do as much as possible, be a sponge, and then lastly, build those connections, because you just never know. You might just gain a friend, and that's great. We all love friends, but you just never know who that connection might get you to the next level of what you want to do in your career. So yeah, those are certainly some things that I've kind of lived by, building connections. I rarely say no to things, and just have fun too. I mean, I'm so fortunate. I have my bad days, there's no doubt. But I think at the end of the day, I can't believe how fortunate I've been, for about 15, 16 years to be doing basically what I love every single day, and to get paid for it. So you're starting right, and build those connections, and you just never know who might ultimately help you out at the end of the day.
Yeah, I mean, of course, I really appreciate it. With that being said, I can't thank you enough for coming on. Is there anything else you want to say to the people watching before we wrap things up?
No, I don't think so, man. This has been fun. I'm fired up to watch you and your career and how it goes, Matthew. And yeah, man, I appreciate you having me on, and hopefully this was enlightening to some out there. It's been a fun journey. It's had its ups and downs. There's no doubt. There's been a couple layoffs in there. It's not all hunky dory, but at the end of the day, I love the questions that you ask, because it does remind me of the fortunate things I've been able to do throughout my career. And sometimes you need to take a step back and realize that things aren't always that bad. So no, I appreciate you, and I'm looking forward to seeing your career and how it goes, man.
Yeah, I mean, of course, really appreciate you coming on. With that being said, again, big thanks to Tim Murray for being the 13th ever Highlight Haven interview guest. And as always, we'll see you next time.